And the ability to calculate the time you need is so challenging. And I'll tell one of my favorite stories and we'll dive into this. So I had a girl who came to see me and she said, "You're going to be so proud of me. I'm going to Starbucks today and I'm going to finish all of my biology and I'm going to finish all of my chemistry." I'm like, "That's great. What does your biology homework involve?" And she said, "Well, I've got to read 30 pages in biology and 36 pages in chemistry." And I said to her, "Do you realize that if you walk into Starbucks and you don't buy coffee and you talk to no one and you sit down and you start reading from the second you're there, that you would be needing 66 minutes, right?"
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's no way. And she's like, "Oh my gosh, it takes me like 5 minutes to read a page." And what that is what's called the planning fallacy. I think I'm going to get it done, but I'm not really going to get it done. I'm going to take one little second. I'm just going to check this chat box because I want to make sure we're not missing any critical questions. I was worried that that maybe we were having a technology glitch, but we're not. So we're right back on track. So the whole idea is with the planning fallacy is we want students to understand what is the minimal amount of time a task is going to take. When am I spending too much time on a task? And what is probably the just right? And we call that a temporal window.
Right. And without guessing, because if you ask a student, how long do you think it will take? They'll just say, "I don't know." Or they'll say 10 minutes.
Or the opposite. "It's going to take me forever."
It's going to take forever. But because they don't have strong time awareness yet, they don't have a real strong ability to remember how long something took. And if they did a similar assignment in the past, then they may not have been really well focused, right?
And so because if I sit down and send a Snapchat and then I pet the dog, it should have taken 10, it took me an hour.
Right. And we'll say to students, do you really want it to take an hour to do math? Or do you want it to just take the amount of time that it has to take, right? Absolutely. And all of them say, "No, I just want it to take the amount of time it has to take."
So what we did, and again, this is one of those, I feel like it's been a lot of renditions. And this is pretty cool. So what we find is we tell kids, don't guess. You need to actually calculate the time. And so we've developed something called a time calculation tool. And with our time calculation tool, you all have this in your handout. The big overview idea, let me sort of move the video there for a minute, is that to help a student calculate time, we're asking them to determine the tasks that they need to do, like you see right here, and then to calculate and determine and multiply the volume of the task by the difficulty to determine the amount of time that they need. And I think the easiest way to do this is to actually show you an example.
Right. So if we look at this typical assignment here, and we look at the directions, the student's being told to correct punctuation and capitalization, and then write a correct paragraph. And if we look at the time calculation sheet, there's a left side and a right side in case there's two parts to a task. And there are two parts to this task. The first part of the task is to correct, and the second part is to write the paragraph. And so what we do is calculate the time for each part. So for the first one, we have 5 different questions. So we're going to put the number 5 in the window there, right below correcting. And then we're going to bring that 5 down. We're going to be writing 5 sentences. Then we're going to bring that 5 down to the calculation below. And then we're going to multiply it by how difficult we think it's going to be. 1 is fairly simple and straightforward. 2, it's a little more difficult. And 3 may have multiple parts and it's really complex, or it's a novel kind of assignment. And so for this student, they said, "Oh, it's a level of difficulty of 1. So we bring that 5 down, multiply it by 1, and then they get 5. And so they anticipate 5 minutes for doing the correcting. And then for the writing, that may be a little more difficult for a lot of students. And if a student looks at that and says, "No, I think it's a level 2 difficulty," again, they bring that 5 down, they multiply it by 2, and then they get 10 minutes. So all in all, you're looking and you can see that the whole task as a whole is going to take about 15 minutes. And so that's what we would shade in. And then we tell students, that's the expected amount of time. And you know what? It sounds crazy, but it works. 99% of the time, students go through this calculation process and it works. And we really use this worksheet with them maybe 3 or 4 times until they start to just get the process down and they can do it mentally. And we do it for students who are, 4th grade and up, because we want them to be able to do some of that multiplication and start doing some of this time calculation. and just start be thinking about how much time they need to plan for something. If we look at another assignment, you know, here we have.
I'm actually going to zoom into this for just a minute. I'm going to check the chat 1 minute. I want to make sure that we're not missing. Okay, we're good. Let me just share for a minute that I know some of the attendees are raising their hand, and I apologize, this is a newer program for us. We're having a little trouble seeing where that's coming up. So if you can just bear with us, we'll try to answer some questions at the end.
Right, we'll try to pull those questions up and then answer them, but it is hard to see those in this program.
It's odd, they're not popping up. But anyway, we see your hand, but we can't see anything else. So shifting.
Right.
Again.
We'll shift from the program and then pull up all the questions at the end.
So this assignment is, you know, again, write a sentence to answer each of the questions below. Which gift would you give to a pedestrian, a world map, a good pair of walking shoes? Explain why. Oop, there we go. Get rid of the zoom in. Okay.
So if a student were to calculate how much time this would take, they would see how many parts there are to the assignment. So the first part is to write explanations, and they would say, well, there's 8 of them there, so they would write an 8 in there, and then they would identify the difficulty as a level 2, and students may identify different levels of difficulty. So it may be a 1 for some students or a 2 for other students.
And I will say, I find some students, you'll say, okay, do you think this assignment is easy, medium, or hard? 1, 2, or 3. There are some students like, easy, easy, it's easy. If you have a student who says everything is easy, then sometimes I'll say the 1, 2, or 3 is kind of like the load on the brain. Like, would the brain be using like a small load? It's going to require many parts of the brain thinking, or a whole lot of the parts of the brain thinking.
Right.
Whatever your vocabulary is, I think you can adjust that for difficulty. You can use the language that helps the child think about it.
Right, like simple, multiple parts, really complex, or something that's really new that they might have to, you know, really work through to become familiar with. And so, you know, they do that calculation. Now here we have 16 minutes, and, you know, it's really funny, and I laugh all the time because, you know, we don't really estimate our time in terms of like these odd minutes. We usually do it in terms of 5. So I don't say to my husband, I'm going to go walk the dog for 16 minutes, hon, I'll be right back, right? So what we do is we ask
14-minute shower.
Right, exactly. We ask kids to either round up or round down, depending on how long they think this is going to take. And so if this student rounds down to 15 minutes, then they would estimate that this would be about a 15-minute task, and then they would shade that in. And, you know, a lot of people will say, like, well, how does this work? How can you make that work? But I think what happens is, what are students doing in order to be able to do this calculation? They're actually mind miming, right? Like, well, how difficult do I think this is? Let me run my mind through this particular task and start really thinking about what this involves, and then I can start doing that calculation. Because students will say, well, you know, I can't really round down. I'd have to round up because I see like the first couple, some of these words are unfamiliar and I don't really know these words. So maybe I need just a little bit more time, you know, but now they're really thinking about what it involves rather than just picking up a sheet and saying, oh, it's going to take me 5 minutes.
And creating this window where you can even have them write their time markers. So you can say, okay, I'm going to start on question 1. My done goal is to be on question 8. And at the midpoint, I want to have 4 explanations written. Something about that too is when a student looks at this and they've calculated a window, is it possible that some kids would be done with this in 5 minutes? Totally, right? No problem. That's great. Is it possible that they're going to need all 15 minutes? Absolutely. But at some point, kids realize, I don't want to spend more than 15 minutes on that assignment, because we have kids that would sit down, they would do this, and then they would do one problem, and then again, they would go get themselves something to drink, and then they'd come back, and then they'd play doodle jump for a few minutes. And before you know it, this worksheet, they've spent 45 minutes at the desk and they're frustrated. So it really does give them a real sense of, well, what's a window of time? The minimum time, kind of the maximum time. And I love this example, and I'll tell you why. So in this example, the student needs to read from page 114 to 118, and then they need to take notes. Now, the funny part about this is that most kids would say, oh, I'm only reading 4 pages because it's 114 to 118. But being literal, 114, 115, 116, 117, 118, I'm actually reading 5 pages. And so I'm going to read my 5 pages, and I have to take 12 bullet point notes, because if it's 3 at least, 4 times 3, that's 12. And again, if you're not looking where I'm saying this, I have to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 bullet point notes. I think reading in my textbook is going to be hard. So 5 times, and I think taking bullet point notes, I mean, I don't have to write full sentences, so I'll call that medium. So 5 times 3 equals 15, and 12 times 2 equals 24. I'm thinking I'm going to round up. And the craziest thing about this is I have a lot of students who would have looked at this and said, oh, that's no big deal. I just need to read and take notes, and think that's just going to take me a few minutes. If you look at this, it actually is a 40-minute assignment. But the other reason why I love this is we have a lot of students who say, well, I don't want to read and then go back and take notes. So now I know if I'm going to read and take notes at the same time, then by my midpoint, I really should be around page 116. And yep, and this one too, of course, this one's funny. So if you go to the next one, so we're going to read and then we have to write. And I think 2 things about this one. One is with reading, you might say, well, there's not pages. So we could count paragraphs. I need to read 4 paragraphs. Because if you look here, there's, 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs. And then write, well, the thing about this is some kids will say, well, you're only writing one thing because there's like 1 space for it.
Right.
And then they'll do 1 times 5 equals 5. I'll round down to 0. So I don't have to spend any time writing at all. No, you do. Okay. So
Nice try.
Yeah, nice try. So we usually will say to students, okay, well, how many sentences is an average paragraph? So, because it says, what do you think the purpose was? Or sometimes I'll actually have students just count the lines. So like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 lines. But if you're not going to fill in every line and you miss maybe half of that, like 7 or so sentences. So if we calculate it, I agree. I think the reading is easy. So 4 times 1 is 4, but we have to do what?
Round up to 5.
And 7 times 3 is 21.
But the student decided to round down.
Yeah, I'm going to round down to 20. And then the next slide is sort of funny. So I have 3 things to show you, and we know the questions you're going to ask. So a couple of things. First is that whole planning sheet, we've actually shrunk it down to a Post-it note. So if you're interested in that, we take a Post-it note and we put it right on there. For some teachers, this makes teachers better teachers. We will put a circle on the top of a worksheet, and we get teachers to calculate their assignment because some teachers may not even realize how long tasks can really take. But in this example, as a student becomes more independent and they don't need the time calculation tool, they can say, okay, well, there's 10 problems. I think it's medium, so 10 times 2 is 20. I'm thinking this is a 20-minute task. But here's the second part. This is really funny. Some kids need breaks. Some kids can't work for 40 minutes.
Yep,
so if you say to them, okay, well, we've calculated the window of work time is 40 minutes. So you could work for 20 minutes. We can shade on a clock with a different color, take a 10-minute break, which is represented by the blue, take another 20 minutes to work. And do you know how many kids are like, well, I don't want to take a break.
I know.
All of a sudden they're like, are you kidding me? Like, that's so much more time, and they'll be a little more effective.
They want to persist and work through.
Yeah. Just 2 little things. There's a funny statistic that says students do best working for 20 minutes and taking a 10-minute break. And unfortunately, this doesn't go with our idea of odd numbers, but I guess it's been proven that adults do best working for 52 minutes and taking a 17-minute break. If you are looking for a timer, there is a cool timer called the Runtastic timer. And I like it. It's actually a fitness timer, but it will show work time, break time, and then it'll go right back to work time. And I have one final thing that you should all be saying is, are you kidding me? I have a high school student, and my high school student has calculus problems. So let's take a look at this calculus problem. I'm going to move my video screen over here for a minute. So in this example, the calculus problem is to read chapter 2, section 5, 10 pages, and do problem set 1 to 3. So I now know that I'm going to read and I'm going to do a problem set. I'm putting my PS for problem set. So I have to read 10 pages in my calculus, and my problem set has 3. Whoop, that was a funny 3. Ah.
Oh my gosh.
Hold on, we have whiplash. Hold on. Shift happens. There's my glitch. Okay, there's my 3 problems. Sorry about that. So let's say that they decide the difficulty of reading in calculus is 3. no problem. So 10 times 3 equals 30 minutes. I know that I'm going to spend 30 minutes reading. But I know that the problem set is tough. So that's a 3 too. So 3 times 3 equals 9, round up to 10. Now every one of you should be saying, are you kidding me? 3 problem sets in calculus is not going to take you 10 minutes. There is no way. And we agree. So in this example then, there's sort of 2 ways that we can tackle this. So I'm going to erase my 3 times 3 equals 9. One of the things that we can do is you should notice that there is this word other right here. And with that other word, we'll say to a student, well, in your experience, what is the typical amount of time that you might spend doing a set within a problem set? And they might say, well, if it's problems 1 through 3, maybe each one takes about 15 minutes. So I can actually put the word other there of 15 minutes. And now I know, okay, a volume of 3 times 15 minutes each, I'm actually going to need 45 minutes. So I can see I'm going to need 30 minutes to read and 45 minutes to work on my problems. And Kristen, I think you actually have even a same but different way that you'll do it sometimes.
Well, sometimes if they don't know how long it will take, we might do one problem and then we will have a start time on the clock and then we'll see where the end time is. And then we'll use that to plan out the rest of the problem. So sometimes you have to, you know, kind of test it out first and see how it goes with one problem.
Right. So in that example, if you tested it out and they said, oh, actually, it took me 20 minutes a problem, whatever it was.
Then you would multiply that times 3.
And of course, one of the big questions that we get is if I decide it's 20 minutes a problem and 20 times 3 equals 60, now you're saying, oh my gosh, we have an hour and a half. Do you use 2 clocks? No, because nobody's really going to focus for 90 minutes straight. And you need that break.
Well, also the whole use of the clock is to be aware of how you're using that hourly time, right? And so you want to see how am I going to focus in this hour? And so you know that at the end of that hour, you're going to erase that and replan for the next hour.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of a good way to think about that.